Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on getting started with Kestra using Docker Compose. So if you have already started kind of playing around with Kestra, seeing the functionality, you may have run it as a single container, but that does have some limitations. The main one being that data is not persisted. So even though we can export flows, save them locally, and import them later, that's not really ideal. So let's jump right in. If I just go and search for Kestra Docker getting started, and I believe it's this link. Oh, that's to install Docker. There should be a one-liner here. Maybe that's just getting started. There we go. I'm just going to copy that, open up a terminal, make that a little bigger here. For some reason, my shortcut doesn't like to work when I want it to. Okay, and we can just paste that here and hit enter. And if you're running this for the first time, it might take about 5 minutes or so to pull the image, build the container. So while it's doing that, I would recommend you step away, grab a cup of coffee, go for a walk, well, a short walk, and come back once that's up and running. All right, now that the pull is complete, we do have Kestra up and running in a Docker container. And while that was pulling, the join the community for the Slack popped up. So this is probably a good time to mention, if you haven't already and you're starting to learn about Kestra, go ahead and join the Slack. If you go to Kestra's page, they've got the join our Slack button. And while you're at it, you can go over to GitHub and star the repo. That just lets the developers of Kestra know that you appreciate all the hard work they put in and to keep it up, which is always nice feedback to receive. With that aside out of the way, if we look here, we have some URLs. Well, kind of URLs. These are actually the IDs of the containers that Kestra is running in. And just from using Kestra, I know that this is running on localhost. You can see that up here where the port is being forwarded. So we can just do localhost 8080. And here we have Kestra. I'm going to go ahead real quick and switch the theme to dark mode. Looks like that is the default now. And go to flows, create. And it's nice that they give us this stock getting started flow to kind of show us how the YAML is crafted, which is how flows and tasks are defined in Kestra. And so I'm just going to go ahead and replace this message with OMG, I worked all day on this flow. I finally got it working the way I wanted. Yay. And I'll make that a little bit bigger. Actually, a little bit smaller. It's kind of hard to see there. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And we can go ahead and execute. If you want, you could do a key value for the execution to kind of keep track of it. But just running this one off, can just go ahead and hit execute. And we can go to the logs. And there is our message. Okay. So we're all done. If we were smart about this, we would go ahead and check that box and export the flow. But I think we've all been there where we've been working on something all day or even just for a few hours, and we're so relieved to get it done. We hit the wrong button, fat finger a little bit. And in this case, running a container like this, it would be just Control C and shutting down that container. So Kestra is not running. And I come back in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and run my container again and just double check my flow, make sure I got everything the way I wanted. And that should be up and running now. And of course, my flow is no longer there. Why is that? Well, because this container was removed. The data did not get persisted. So if we scroll back up, I'll make this a little bit bigger. Not sure if that's better or worse. We can see, well, I'm going to Control L to clear that. And we can see that it's going to pull the most recent image always, and it's going to remove the container once we are done. So any data we have in that container will be gone. And even if we didn't remove that container, there's still a chance we could delete that container and any data in it would then be lost. So what is a better way to do this? Well, it will be using Docker Compose. And I'm going to refresh, make sure that's down. And I'm just going to look for Kestra, Docker Compose. And we get a link to the GitHub with the Kestra Docker Compose file. So to make this a little bit more readable, I'm going to go ahead and make a directory where we can work. And I'm just going to call this Kestra, change into it. And I do have Visual Studio Code installed. Might be different on your system to open it up. I'm on Linux Mint. But here we have our Kestra directory in Visual Studio Code. And we'll just make our Docker Compose file here. And we can just go ahead and copy and paste all of this. All right. I'll ignore that. Okay, so what do we get here in the Docker Compose file? Well, if we look at the top, these are labeled pretty nicely. We have Docker volumes, which is a way to persist your data. You could use bind mounts and mount them to a physical directory on your local machine. But if that is a relative directory, you cannot run that everywhere. And especially with Postgres, you can run into permission issues. Once you've hit those 3 or 4 times, kind of becomes second nature to work through them. But it's nice to have the Docker volumes just to remove that barrier for people coming into this fresh. So we have 2 Docker volumes, one for the Postgres data, which is the database being used, and the Kestra data for the Kestra container. If we go ahead, we do see the Postgres data. Make that a little smaller. I believe that should be big enough to be readable. It's pulling the Postgres image, mounting the Postgres data to that volume. We see some configuration. It's making a database called Kestra in Postgres. There is the username and password, and then it's doing a health check. Kestra is then pulling the latest full Kestra image. The user is going to be root. There is a command passed to Kestra showing it how to run. And then it's mounting the data to the Kestra volume to app storage inside the container, which is Kestra data Docker volume. And then Docker is mounted so that containers can run inside the container. And then temp is needed as well for some of those actions. Going down, nothing too remarkable, just passing the password to connect to Postgres. Some more configuration there. We see our ports are forwarded to our local host, 8080 being Kestra, and then the Kestra container depends on Postgres, so it's going to wait for Postgres to be running. And How is it going to do that? Well, with a health check here. Okay. With all that being said, I'm going to open up a terminal here with control. The little tick mark under the escape key is how you open up a terminal in Visual Studio Code. And just do Docker compose up. I could do -D so that the output won't be printed to the terminal, but I want to make sure there's no hiccups. So I want that output to see if there are any errors. And I do have an error here. This looks really odd to me. And I'm wondering, oh, let me Control S to save it. I think that might be the issue. Notice I now have an X up there. And all right. And because we ran that one-off container, most of that, the image layers were already on our local machine. So if you didn't do that first, you'd run into the same bit of a delay when it's pulling down those images. But as you can see, after you've run it, it really is quite quick. All right. We see our URLs here, and we can go ahead and open up a web browser and go to localhost 8080. And I'm going to create a flow, and I'm just going to call this Kestra first flow. And for the namespace, I'm just going to call that demo. It will have one task in this flow that is Kestra first flow, and I'm just going to call this first flow. And all it's going to do is log a message, and this is the message it will log. So I'm just going to change this to this is a flow / Kestra data stored in a Docker volume. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And we can execute it. And no surprises here. That is printed out. And now if I go back to Visual Studio Code, let me go ahead and navigate back to that directory. And Control C to kill those containers. And let's see if I can Alt Tab. There we go. And if we hit refresh, Kestra is no longer running. So, of course, we can't interact with the web server. But let me Alt Tab back, and I will go ahead and bring that back up. And I think the issue with viewing has to do with how much I'm zoomed in. It's erasing the tabs at the bottom, but that's okay. I'll just tab as needed. Okay, and as we can see, our flow is in fact persisted now. All right, so let me get rid of this, and we'll make a pipeline we'll make a data pipeline that's a little more interesting than just logging a message. And I have already created one that should be here in downloads. So let me just import that so I don't waste a lot of time with you just watching me type. And I will edit that flow. So let's see. We can probably move that. And now I'm going to zoom out for just a moment so we can kind of see it in context here. At the top, you might notice I am defining variables. These are the variables that will be used in the flow. And for this particular flow, I decided to download the New York taxi cab data. And so if you just Google New York taxi data set, you can come out here, and New York has been nice enough to share, let's see, a yellow taxi trip, green taxi trip, for hire vehicle, and records like that in Parquet. And if you're not familiar with Parquet, you don't really need to worry about that. It is just a compressed file format that makes reading the data in uh, very quick for columnar storage, and it can make it very small and kind of uh, keep track of duplicate data so it's not storing it twice. So all I did here was I right-clicked and copied the link address. And if we paste that, uh, you can see how they're using a naming convention where, looking at this, I'm guessing that's sitting in front of an S3 bucket, and they're all going to have this same kind of beginning and then the month year dot parquet. And so this variable here says a trigger date, and that's kind of a or switch. If it's running as a trigger, use the trigger date. If not, use the execution date. Execution date meaning when we go ahead and hit execute. And then we are going to pipe that into a function which subtracts 2 months from that date, and then pipe it again and format the date so it matches. Deleted that too quickly. Into the format we see here, 4 digits for year dash 2 digits for month. And a good way to test this, this is not needed for the flow, but when constructing variables, I'm still getting comfortable with them. It's nice to just put that here, double curly brackets, and then vars dot the variable name. In this case, I was just working on file var. So if I go ahead and save that and execute it, indeed, it is December 2023 right now when I'm pushing this button. So I get 10/2023 because 2 months were subtracted. And the upload file we will get to momentarily, but I guess I can print that out just to make sure that's working. And it's going to say yellow trip data. Again, year 2 months in the past, dot parquet. All right. I can go ahead and highlight this portion that I don't really need at the moment, but might come in handy later. Control slash to comment that out. And then I'm going to go ahead and download. One quick thing before I move on, I should mention the variables, if you're not used to them, can be a little bit tricky. It is Pebble, which is Java, or a Java module that's used to parse the YAML. And how do I look up how to do this? Well, if you just go out here and do Kestra, Pebble, the Pebble FAQ here, and let's look for Kestra, Pebble basic usage. That works. Okay. And you can look here. There's operations you can use in your YAML that will be understood by the Pebble parser. So again, take some playing around with, but once you get used to it, you can figure it out. And again, logging helps. If you're getting an error, look at those logs. the messages will kind of point you in the right direction. And of course, as always, you can jump into the Slack channel, ask there. There's a lot of very smart people that are always eager and very quick to help. Okay, let's switch back to our flow. So I will uncomment this, and this task is going to be download taxi data. And if I wasn't familiar with how to download a file, you can open up a new tab here, go to Blueprints, and if we just do download, there we go. Just because it said download PDF. If you look here, there's nothing in this plugin which would suggest it is specific to PDFs. It is just downloading. So that's how I found this one, and just copied, updated the name, gave it a new URI. In this case, it is a variable of the file we want to download. So let's go back to this window with our flow. We can save it, execute. And I believe this file is a bit large, so we'll give that a moment. Could also be my internet connection speed. We can go ahead and look at the logs here. Again, no message is printed out because we are not piping a message to the logs, but we can go to outputs here and see what we get. We see we have a URI, a download preview. Preview is not going to give us much because, again, it's a Parquet file. So it is not a human readable file like a text file or a CSV file. This is going to be probably in some way or another, I don't know, maybe hexadecimal that's keeping track of the column values and how it's compressed. But we did indeed download the file. And if we go back to our flow, we can go ahead and see here. We can go ahead and do the outputs. And we would just need to move this one down. And I want the outputs. That was the tab we were on. Well, what do I want the outputs of? The task before this, which is download PDF, and I want the URI. And I'll paste that here. And that's going to be the message. Control / to uncomment that. Execute it again. Again, it might take another 20-30 seconds just because it's going to download the file again. And let's see. Missing variable, download PDF. This is why logs are very nice. I'm guessing that is not the name of the task before this. It is download taxi data. And while we're here, I'm going to update this here to download taxi data, save and run it one more time. Okay, and now that that's done, we can look at our second task, and we see that that is where our file is being downloaded to. And we do have a variable that can capture that, but that's not a very friendly name. And what we're ultimately looking to do in this pipeline is going to be to upload it to Google Cloud Storage. So to do that, we're going to need to do a few things. One will be, we will need a GCP account. If you're signing up for the first time, you're going to get a lot of free credits, I believe $300 these days. Or even if you have a paid account, just going through this is definitely going to cost you less than $5 if you delete the files once you're done. So let's go ahead and head on over to GCP and show how to do that. Okay, here I am in GCP in a project I've created. We will need to set up two things, one being a place for our files to go, which will be a Google Cloud Storage bucket. And to do that, we just need to click the little hamburger over here and go to Cloud Storage Buckets. I already have one here called Kestra Bucket for Test. But for you, you'd want to create, name it whatever you'd like. Probably will want to leave those at the defaults, your default region, standard storage. Again, that'll cost you probably pennies. And then we will want to go to IAM and admin. See if I can make this a little bit bigger. And go to service accounts. And we're going to create a service account. And I'm just going to call this Kestra Data Pusher. And create and continue. For the role, we already created a bucket. I don't really think that fits into a pipeline to create a bucket, but maybe it does. If so, you could make them a Google Cloud Storage admin, which would allow them to create buckets. But if we want to keep the permissions kind of narrow, we just need an object creator. So if we scroll through, a lot of things named cloud storage, and we just need object creator, meaning we can create things inside the bucket. And we'll just say done. And here we have at the bottom, Kestra Data Pusher. Go over here to the ellipses, manage keys. And we want to add a new key. I'm going to choose JSON. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of that. Just FYI, big no-no would be sharing your service account key, showing that to anyone. I will be deleting this service account directly after recording. Just a quick disclaimer to stay safe out there. Okay. So if we go ahead and switch back to our flow, we can go ahead and we can just delete that. We have the template they give us to go ahead and write to log, so can use that again if we need to test. So I already have a task written here. We called it upload to GCS. And again, if you're looking for something, you can always go to blueprints, maybe cloud storage. There we go. And we can see this is the plugin that we want to use for this task. We want to say where it's from, where it's going to. So if we switch back, we can see we are using that plugin for this task. Where is it going to be coming from? It's going to be the outputs of the download taxi data task. It's going to grab that URI, the globally unique name of the bucket we created in GCP, and we're going to rename it to the variable we tested that is just yellow taxi data, and then year-day.parquet. All right. So, well, we need a way to tell Kestra that we have permissions to do this, or rather we need to tell Google Cloud that we have the correct permissions to put things in this bucket. So let's switch back to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to Control-C to bring that down. And I'm going to make a new directory and just call that keys. And inside that directory, I'm going to make a new file and just called mycreds.json and paste in the service account key that we copied. Copy the contents here of our service account file and Control S to save that. All right. And we are going to want to make that a secret. So we want to say secret GCP creds equals, and we're going to use base 64 encoding. And this will need to be adjusted depending on what you're encoding and what operating system you're on. Again, I'm on Linux Mint, so I just happen to know that for the multi-line JSON file, the -w0 flag is what I need. I need to tell it where that key file is, and it's relative to where I'm at. So keys mycreds.json. And where do I want to put that? I want to put that into a file called .env encoded. All right. And now that we have that, we can go ahead and make the env file. Again, if you're wondering, how do you know how to use this? You can just go out here, Kestra secrets. Give that a moment to load up. And it shows you how you can encode your passwords, how you can use them just in plain text. But encoding them is a good idea. And because we did env encoded, we can just grab this. And we can just probably, I guess it makes sense to put it here right above environment. We're going to make sure those line up. Control S to save. We see that X there at the top. And run Docker compose up. Give that a moment. And let's go back to our flow. That should be running again. Okay. Let's go ahead and execute that real quick. That will take some time, both for downloading the file and uploading to Google Cloud Storage. Not more than 2 minutes, but just know that that's normal if you're following along. Okay, that took 1 minute, 40 seconds and some change. Let's see what we got. Well, it looks like nothing in our bucket, but let's go ahead and hit refresh. And there we have October 2023 yellow trip data. We can go ahead and, because this service account doesn't have delete permissions, if it tries to write this file again, it's going to have an error. And in this next step, I want to show the value here of having tasks like this orchestrated, because right now you're probably thinking, well, I could have just downloaded this to my local PC and uploaded it to a bucket, maybe even used GSUtil and uploaded it faster. Well, let's talk about scheduling. And for that, we will use a trigger. And if we go back to edit flow, this I copy and paste it in. And if you put a trigger here, well, let's go ahead and cut this real quick. Control X. And if I save and go to trigger, notice I get that kind of, I don't know, that's not a caution or a stop sign. I'm not sure what that is, but I think it's pretty universal for no-go. But then if I go ahead and put the trigger in and save it, Kestra's smart enough to go, hey, you've got a trigger here. And what is this trigger? This trigger, well, it's disabled because I did not want that to run. Not that it would, because it is the 19th, but that's just kind of a stop I put on there just so it wouldn't start running in case I fat fingered the cron expression. And if you're not familiar with cron expressions, let me point you to crontab.guru. I believe that's what it is. Yes. And I should probably point out triggers. So Kestra, triggers. So triggers and schedules. And if we look back here at our trigger, well, we have a trigger with an ID of schedule. And what type of, I don't know if you'd call that a plugin. Well, what type of trigger? It is a schedule, meaning it runs at certain times, not triggered by an event. It is triggered by a time and date. And if you know cron expressions, this is old hat, but if you come here and you say, okay, well, star space, star space, star space, star space, it's going to run at every minute all the time. Well, that would be a lot. You can look down here again at the examples, tips, probably use ChatGPT as well. But I want to run this. So minute 0, hour 8. What day do I want? On the 20th of every month. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to paste that in here. All right, that looks good. So what this is going to do is at 8 a.m. on the 20th of every month, it is going to go download the file, rename it based on the trigger or execution date. Because it's running from the trigger, it will use the trigger date. So it's going to think it is a past date. And why am I using 2 months? Well, sometimes it takes a lot of time to put data together, compile it, make it nice and pretty, and put it out there for the public to use. So there can be a lag. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 2. If we go back to our New York taxi data set, let's see if they have November yet. They do not, but it is the 19th of December, and they do have October available, so we can kind of surmise that they will have, so if it's running next month in January on the 20th, the November data will be there. Okay, and one last bit. While we're looking at trigger and schedules, if we go down and we look specifically at schedules, we can find backfill and start date. So if we go ahead and copy that, that is quite a large date range. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new line. And I just want the 2023 data. So to do that, I'm going to do 2023, and I'm going to want to start in April. Yes, I had to use my fingers a little bit there. And I want to start at midnight, because then it's going to say, well, I missed a run at 8 a.m. on the 20th because I started at midnight. And I'm going to go ahead and set that to false. Control S to save it. And let's see, I don't believe I will need to kick that off, because if I used execute, well, it's going to say execute.date and then subtract 2 months. Whereas I want this to run on a schedule. And so it's going to go through all those days or all those months from the backfill date, and then act like it's running the 20th of April, May, June, July, and so far, so forth, up until today, and then tomorrow, if this is still running, it's going to run again at 8 a.m. And we'll give that a little while because that will take some time. Okay, now that that's finished, we can see our successful runs here, and you can see that the triggers were schedules indicated here by the S's. And if we switch back over to our bucket, we can see hopefully all of our files here. I would have thought, oh, that's right. Because it triggers at 8 a.m. on the 20th of every month, and as I said, it is the 19th. Uh, it did not get the October file. So it only went up through November. And I did mess up a little bit here. So we see February. If we go back to our flow, I guess I didn't count on my fingers too well. That I started at 4. That should have been 3, but that's okay. And if you don't want it to run, you can just switch that back to true. If you don't want that to run and you're going to keep it running for some reason. So we downloaded these files. If we kept this running, again, every month it would go and magically get those files, put them into our Google Cloud storage. So where could we go from here? Let's see, we could go and head on over to BigQuery Studio. And we're just going to create a data set. And we'll just call this taxi data. Multi-region is fine. You can run into some issues with multi-region with the buckets in BigQuery, but I won't go into all that. And I'm going to just go ahead and I think open, or there should be a way to open up a query editor. Let me see if it'll just let me do it here. And let me look up the syntax. We're going to want to create external table for BigQuery. And we'll just copy that. All right. And project ID. Let me go ahead and go back into my GCP Cloud login. Project ID can be a little bit misleading here. You actually want this, not the friendly name at the top. And the data set will be the one we just created. Taxi data. And external taxi data. The table formats. So that's going to be the format of our files, which is Parquet. And the path to our bucket, which I'm not sure if I recall. I believe it's GS. Kestra. Is it demo or test? Go to our buckets. Just have the one. Look at configuration. There we go. And we can just do that. And I think /star for all files. Let's see if that runs. Okay. So here we should be able to query, and we can do the top 1000. And it's kind of hard to see. And sorry, I should have probably made that a little bit bigger. So create external table, our project ID, the data set name that we created here, and then the name of the table we want to create, which was created, the format of our files, and then point the URIs to our bucket. And if we look here, it's a little crowded, a little hard to see, but we do indeed have data. Looks like it probably grabbed the last file first. So we see September data. We could do, let's see. Well, let me copy this. Do min for minimum. And I will also, copy, not cut. And I will also do the max. All right. That's a little bit odd. And that's a little bit odd. So it looks like you might want to do some data cleaning. So it looks like maybe some October data found its way into the September data, and some January data found itself into the February data. But hopefully this was just kind of a good overview, very small examples of how you can use variables, how you can set up triggers, schedules with Kestra. Running it locally maybe isn't that much of a utility, but you could always spin up a VM in Amazon or GCP. You could set up Docker Compose, run Kestra there. Of course, you could use Kestra Enterprise. You could, I believe, deploy on Restack, deploy it as a Kubernetes cluster, whatever suits your needs. And again, if you run into any issues, go on over to the Slack. There's a special channel for getting started, as well as a channel for help. You can find a lot of quick answers there, explanations, and hopefully this is enough to get you going using Kestra and Docker Compose and seeing some of its features and really how it's a powerful tool to have in your tool belt.